I wanted to be part of the Royal Commission so that I could actually tell my story about our experience, and hopefully that it never happens to somebody else.
It's been more than a year since Ryan Lowe sat in the witness box at the Banking Royal Commission. Ryan gave evidence of the emotional toll of dealing with Suncorp Bank after the sudden death of his father. The bank threatened his mother with eviction if she couldn't afford to meet repayments on her husband's loans worth $1 million.
The way the bank sort of treated us, it was just, I would put it, inexcusable considering the situation that we were in. My father had just been killed in an accident, and the bank just showed absolutely no compassion at all.
Ryan was one of 27 people who outlined their bad personal experience with financial institutions at the Royal Commission.
People don't realise what goes into providing evidence at a Royal Commission. It's not just turning up on the day and speaking. There's months that go into that, like months of work. And obviously we're doing it in the hope that things will change.
Ryan's disappointed that few of the 76 recommendations from Commissioner Kenneth Hayne have been implemented.
To go through the process and kind of see very little change and very little of the recommendations being implemented is very frustrating.
Ryan doesn't think justice has been served for those hurt by financial institutions' bad behaviour.
No one's in jail. If you commit similar crimes in another sense outside of a bank, you go to court and there's a consequence.
At the time, the government talked tough.
From today, the banking sector must change, and change forever.
The Royal Commission is estimated to have cost the banks billions in compensation and lost earnings, but share prices have bounced back strongly since the report was handed down in February. The government backed away from the recommendation to ban mortgage broker commissions.
Some of those recommendations weren't specific in the way that they should be implemented. The pace hasn't been slow. It's been 6 months since Commissioner Hayne handed down his recommendations. There have been 19 sitting days in that time, and already 10 of those recommendations have been acted upon and implemented. They're just the government's recommendations. What we've seen is one of the recommendations is to ensure that our regulators have the capabilities to ensure that they have the enforcement capabilities to pursue poor behaviour and misconduct. So that's one of the recommendations that we have already started implementing.
Despite those changes, no one has faced criminal charges for the behaviour uncovered.
It is now incumbent upon ASIC to keep the feet to the fire, to actually say to corporate Australia, enough is enough. This is what the community expects of you, this is what the law demands of you, and this is what ASIC is going to do to enforce that law.
He handed the story to Adele Ferguson.
Former head of the competition regulator, Graham Samuel, says you don't need criminal charges to send a message.
You might expect in the not too distant future action being taken against certain directors for failure to comply with their obligations to act with reasonable care and diligence. That will in its own way send as many shockwaves through the corporate community as a criminal action will do.
Around financial hardship.
Fiona Guthrie from Financial Counselling Australia agrees that criminal prosecutions are not the measure of success.
No action. People did want to see heads on spikes, but it was not that kind of process. One of the things I think that the Royal Commission showed was that no one actually was accountable for some of this bad behaviour, and it was systematic. There was a cultural problem across the whole of the industry.
The Commission criticised the performance of both financial regulators, the prudential regulator APRA and the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. Neither APRA nor ASIC accepted 730's invitation for an interview, but both have said they have lifted their game. Graham Samuel, who has just reviewed APRA's effectiveness, says both regulators need to understand the importance of being open with the public.
And I think that when you've got regulators that are dealing in very complex areas, it's incumbent on them to actually explain to the community at large, not just to business, what it is that they're dealing with, why they are doing it.
Grant Stewart gave evidence at the Royal Commission on behalf of his son Jonathan, who has Down syndrome.
How are you? Champ, how are you? You good?
Yeah, I'm good. Well, I think in the end it was about prevention, trying to help prevent this happening to other people.
The recording of Jonathan being aggressively sold insurance he clearly didn't understand was one of the most powerful pieces of evidence of bad behaviour in the finance sector.
Okay, so you can choose between 4,000 and 15,000 to leave behind for your loved ones, just in case you died. So do you think 10,000 would be enough for you?
I don't mind.
Do you think 10 would be enough to leave behind for them?
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, you can go up to 15, mind. Are you happy with the 10?
Happy with 10.
It was such a concrete example of what harm can be done by somewhat unscrupulous soliciting of sales, and with a whole incentivised sales force that was involved.
A year later, and Grant and Jonathan have returned to work at the Melbourne Storm Football Club, Grant as the team chaplain and Jonathan helping out part-time. Grant previously hadn't wanted Jonathan's name or image to be known to the public.
We thought the risks were way too high, and because of his the kind of impact it had on him at the time and his feelings of guilt, and we didn't want that to be exacerbated.
Grant is pleased his testimony appears to have made a difference.
It looks like there's going to be some real change happening, and I know last month ASIC has proposed to ban cold calling by insurance companies, which was what we were advocating for from the start, and so I'm really encouraged to hear about that, and I just hope that carries through.
My worry is that our memories will fade, the same structural problems are still in place in financial services, which is that shareholders are prioritised over everyone else. And so in 10 years' time, my view is that we'll be back here again with problems in the way financial services are marketed and sold to Australians.
I'm just hoping now that since all this has been exposed, I mean, a Royal Commission is, the biggest spotlight you can shine onto a bank. I just hope that they learn from this, and I'm just hoping that, all of the witnesses, including myself, our stories have made an impact, just so that nobody goes through this again in the future.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.